In July 2022, a young couple stepped off a seaplane onto the pristine shores of Turtle Island, a secluded paradise in Fiji's Yasawa archipelago. Chris Chen, a 36-year-old pharmacist from Memphis, Tennessee, and her new husband, Bradley Dawson, were starting what was supposed to be the happiest chapter of their lives, their honeymoon. Chris, radiant with excitement, had spent months planning this dream getaway to a resort so exclusive it hosted only 14 couples at a time. But just 2 days later, this tropical haven would become the scene of a brutal crime that shocked the world. On the morning of July 9th, Chris was found dead in the luxury villa, her body battered beyond recognition. Her husband, the man who vowed to love and protect her, was nowhere to be found. He had fled the island by kayak, carrying his passport and a chilling secret. What drove Bradley Dawson to commit such a heinous act? Was it a moment of rage, a calculated plan, or something else entirely? This is the story of Chris Chen, a woman whose light touched everyone she met, and the tragedy that ended her life in a place meant for love. Chris Chen was born in 1986 in Denver, Colorado, to her parents Ziwei Yu and her father, who would later describe her as their entire world. From a young age, Chris was a beacon of warmth and kindness. Friends described her as the kind of person who made you feel like you'd known her forever the moment you met her. She was the sun, her friend Suzanne Simone would later say, always shining, always bringing people together. Chris's infectious smile and generous spirit drew people to her, whether she was hosting dinner parties or simply chatting with a neighbor. Chris's passion for helping others defined her life. After earning a degree in pharmacy from the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, she built a career as a clinical pharmacist at Kroger in Memphis. Her dedication earned her the prestigious 2021 Wolters Kluwer Clinical Drug Information Award for Excellence in Clinical Communication, a testament to her skill and compassion. But Chris was more than her profession. Before pharmacy, she had trained as a pastry chef, delighting friends with her culinary creations. She loved dogs, often sharing photos of her pets on social media, and she had a knack for making everyone around her feel valued. Her neighbor, Morris Appery, recalled seeing her just before her trip to Fiji. She was elated, he said. She couldn't stop talking about how excited she was for her honeymoon. Chris's life wasn't without challenges. As an only child, she carried the weight of her parents' hopes and dreams. Her mother, Ziwei Yu, described her as my little girl, my reason for living. Chris's move to Memphis, a city far from her Denver roots, was a bold step, but she thrived there, building a tight-knit community of friends and colleagues. By 2021, at 35, she was ready for a new chapter, love. That's when she met Bradley Dawson, a man who seemed to promise her the future she'd always dreamed of. Bradley Dawson was 38 years old when he entered Chris's life in November 2021, an IT specialist at Youth Villages, a nonprofit in Memphis focused on children's mental health. Dawson presented himself as charming and dependable. Born and raised in Memphis, he was a local with a seemingly stable life. His colleagues described him as professional, with no red flags in his work record. His only brush with the law was a minor speeding ticket in 2016. To those who knew him casually, he was an unremarkable man, polite, reserved, and unassuming, but there were hints of a darker side. Dawson had recently finalized a divorce from his first wife in January 2022 after a marriage that included a trip to Fiji in 2019. That earlier visit had left him obsessed with the islands, a detail that would later take on chilling significance. Friends of Chris were surprised by how quickly Dawson proposed. They had met in November, and by February 2022, just 3 months later, they were married in a small ceremony in Memphis. It was a shock, Morris Appery recalled. It happened so quickly. We barely knew him. Those closer to Dawson saw cracks in his facade. His ex-girlfriend, Kristen Baker, later spoke to investigators about his behavior when drinking. He He was charming when sober, she said, but when he drank, he could change. He'd black out and do things he claimed he didn't remember the next day. She recounted episodes of volatility arguments that escalated out of nowhere, fueled by alcohol. Yet, to Chris, Dawson appeared to be the partner she'd been waiting for. Friends noted her happiness, her belief that she'd found her soulmate. She threw herself into planning their honeymoon, choosing Turtle Island for its romance and seclusion. But as the couple prepared for their trip, those closest to Chris couldn't shake a lingering unease about the man she'd chosen. On July 7, 2022, Chris and Bradley arrived at Turtle Island Resort, a 500-acre private island in Fiji's Yasawa archipelago. The resort was a dream destination known for its crystal-clear waters and exclusivity. It was the kind of place where couples came to celebrate love, far from the stresses of the world. Chris, ever the planner, had researched every detail, from the seaplane ride to the private villa they'd share. She posted excitedly on social media before the trip, sharing her anticipation with friends. For her, this was more than a vacation, it was the start of a new life with Bradley. The first day was idyllic. The couple settled into their beachfront villa, a luxurious retreat with panoramic views of the Pacific. They joined other guests for meals and activities, blending into the small community of honeymooners and anniversary celebrants, staff noted. Chris's warmth, how she smiled at everyone, while Bradley seemed quieter, content to let her shine. But beneath the surface, tensions were already simmering. On the evening of July 8th, the resort hosted a family fun night on the beach, complete with cocktails and live music. Chris and Bradley attended, mingling with other guests. Witnesses later recalled seeing them drink heavily, their moods shifting as the night wore on. Around 10 p.m., something changed. Bradley, emboldened by alcohol, began acting inappropriately with another female guest. Chris, embarrassed and upset, confronted him. Their argument spilled out onto the beach, drawing the attention of nearby guests. One couple, staying in a bungalow just 20 yards away, overheard raised voices. It sounded heated, they later told police. "We heard Chris say, 'How could you do this to me?' The argument grew louder, then stopped abruptly around midnight. The couple returned to their villa and the night fell silent. No one could have known that those would be some of Chris's final moments. On the morning of July 9th, the resort's routine began as usual. Staff prepared breakfast for the guests, expecting Chris and Bradley to join the group. But their absence went unnoticed. At first, newlyweds often lingered in their villas. By lunchtime, however, concern grew. The couple had missed 2 meals. Unusual for such a structured resort, a housekeeper was sent to check on them. What she found would haunt her for years. Inside the villa, the scene was horrific. Chris Chen lay lifeless on the bathroom floor, surrounded by broken glass and blood. Her head bore deep lacerations, her body bruised from a brutal assault. One of her arms was caught in the toilet's water tank, a detail that suggested a desperate struggle. The housekeeper screamed, alerting staff who called the police. An autopsy later confirmed that Chris died of traumatic brain injury, the result of multiple blows to the head. The injuries were so severe that her body couldn't be embalmed, forcing her parents to cremate her remains in Fiji. Bradley Dawson was gone. The villa showed signs of a hasty departure. His belongings were missing, and a kayak from the resort was unaccounted for. Staff recalled seeing him leave the villa in the early hours, carrying a backpack. The realization hit: the man who had been Chris's husband for less than 5 months was now a fugitive, and the paradise of Turtle Island was a crime scene. As police descended on Turtle Island, the search for Bradley Dawson began. The resort's remote location complicated matters. Accessible only by seaplane or boat, it was a place designed for seclusion, not pursuit, but Dawson's escape was short-lived. On July 10th, a local resident named Manoa Ratalele spotted a disheveled man on Matakawalavu Island, a neighboring island in the Yasawa chain. The man was Bradley Dawson, looking exhausted and out of place. When questioned, he claimed he'd left Chris alive after an argument and had simply needed to get away. Ratalele, suspicious, contacted authorities. On July 11th, police arrested Dawson in Nadi, Fiji's main hub. In his possession were his passport, over $1,000 in cash, credit cards, and, chillingly, Chris's driver's license. The items suggested he had planned to flee the country, perhaps aware of the gravity of his actions. When questioned, Dawson initially confessed to police, admitting he'd been involved in Chris's death. But after consulting a lawyer, he retracted his statement, claiming it was an accident. "We argued," he said. "Things got out of hand, but I didn't mean to kill her." His story raised more questions than answers. How could such severe injuries be accidental? And why had he fled with his passport? Investigators worked quickly. To piece together the evidence, the villa yielded critical clues, blood stains, broken glass, and a shattered toilet tank, which prosecutors later suggested was the murder weapon. Dawson, however, had no visible injuries, undermining his claim of a mutual altercation. Police requested his DNA to match against evidence, but he reportedly refused, further fueling suspicion. As news of the crime spread, Chris's family in Denver was devastated. Her mother, Ziwaliu, received the call no parent expects. "I lost my only child," she said. "My little girl was taken from me in the most brutal way." Back in Memphis, Chris's friends and colleagues grappled with shock. Suzanne Simone, one of her closest friends, organized a vigil where dozens gathered to honor Chris's memory. "She didn't deserve this," Simone told reporters. "She was the best of us." Meanwhile, investigators dug into Dawson's past. His ex-girlfriend, Kristen Baker, provided crucial insight. She described his history of heavy drinking and erratic behavior, recalling incidents where he'd become aggressive or disoriented after alcohol. "He wasn't violent with me," she clarified, "but I could see how he might lose control." Neighbors in Memphis's Cooper Young neighborhood, where Chris and Dawson lived, painted a mixed picture. Some described the couple as happy, with Chris often seen walking her dogs or chatting warmly with others. But others noted Dawson's reserved nature, how he rarely engaged with the community. One neighbor, who asked to remain anonymous, said, "He seemed nice enough, but there was something off. He didn't look at you when he talked." In Fiji, the investigation faced challenges. The remote setting meant limited forensic resources, and cultural sensitivities required careful handling of the case. Turtle Island's staff cooperated fully, providing statements and access to the crime scene. Guests who had witnessed the couple's argument on July 8th were interviewed, their accounts consistent. Chris and Bradley had fought loudly, with Chris sounding hurt and betrayed. The prosecution began building a case, arguing that Dawson's actions were intentional, driven by rage or premeditation. The defense, however, insisted it was a tragic accident, a moment of passion gone wrong. In December 2024, Bradley Dawson stood trial at the Lautoka High Court in Fiji. The 8-day bench trial, presided over by Justice Riyaz Hamza, drew international attention. The prosecution painted a damning picture. Dawson, angered by the argument on the beach, had followed Chris to their villa and attacked her with lethal force. The severity of her injuries, deep lacerations, a fractured skull, and extensive bruising suggested a prolonged and deliberate assault. The broken toilet tank, they argued, was likely used to inflict the fatal blows. Dawson's flight by kayak, with his passport and Chris's driver's license, pointed to consciousness of guilt. The defense countered that the death was unintentional. Dawson's attorney, Iqbal Khan, argued that the couple's argument had escalated into a physical altercation, but Dawson hadn't intended to kill Chris. "There's no evidence of premeditation," Khan said. "This was a tragic accident between two people who loved each other." Dawson took the stand, repeating his claim that he blacked out from drinking and couldn't fully recall the events. He expressed remorse, saying, "I loved Chris. I never meant for this to happen, but his lack of injuries and the brutality of the attack weakened his story. Witnesses provided critical testimony. The housekeeper described the horrific scene in the villa, her voice breaking as she recounted finding Christ's body. Guests from the beach party confirmed the couple's argument, with one recalling Christ's words, "You've humiliated me." Manoa Ratalele, the man who found Dawson, testified about his suspicious behavior on Matakawalavu Island. The prosecution also highlighted Dawson's refusal to provide DNA, suggesting he feared it would link him to the crime scene. On December 18, 2024, Justice Hamza delivered his verdict. "I am satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that Bradley Dawson caused the death of Chris Chen, either intentionally or with reckless disregard for her life," he said. Dawson was convicted of murder. On February 11, 2025, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 18 years before parole eligibility. Hamza condemned Dawson's actions, noting that he had left Chris alone and helpless to die. In a powerful statement, Christ's mother, Ziwaliu, addressed Dawson through a victim impact statement read in court. "You took my only child from me. I hope the memories of what you did to her in her last moments haunt you because you are a monster." The conviction brought little solace to Christ's family. Ziwaliu and her husband faced the unimaginable task of grieving their daughter in a foreign country. Unable to bring Christ's body home due to the extent of her injuries, they cremated her remains in Fiji, holding a private ceremony on the island where she died. "I wanted to see her one last time," Ziwe said. "But they told me it wasn't possible. I'll never understand why she had to suffer like that." In Memphis, Christ's community rallied to honor her memory. Friends organized fundraisers for domestic violence charities in her name, determined to keep her legacy alive. Suzanne Simon spoke at one event, saying, "Christ would want us to help others, to make sure no one else goes through what she did." The case also sparked conversations about domestic violence, with advocates pointing to warning signs like Dawson's history of alcohol-fueled volatility. Organizations like the National Domestic Violence Hotline, reachable at 1-800-799-733, saw increased attention as media covered the story. For Turtle Island Resort, the tragedy was a stain on its reputation. The staff, deeply shaken, issued a statement expressing condolences and emphasizing their commitment to guest safety. The case left lingering questions. Why had Dawson snapped so violently? Was his claim of a blackout plausible, or was it a convenient excuse? Friends speculated about the pressures of his recent divorce and quick remarriage, but no clear motive emerged. Some wondered if his obsession with Fiji, tied to his previous trip, played a role in choosing the location a place where he could isolate Christ. Christ's story resonated far beyond Fiji and Memphis. It was a stark reminder that even in the most beautiful settings, darkness can lurk. Her life, filled with promise and love, was cut short by the person she trusted most. Her mother's words lingered. "She was my reason for living." For those who knew Christ, her light would never fade, even in the shadow of her tragic end. The murder of Chris Chen is a story of love betrayed, a dream turned into a nightmare. On a remote island meant for celebration, a young woman's life was taken in an act of unthinkable violence. Bradley Dawson, the man who promised to cherish her, now sits behind bars, sentenced to life for a crime that shattered countless lives. But Christ's story is not defined by her death. It's defined by the warmth she brought to the world, the lives she touched as a pharmacist, a friend, and a daughter. Her memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved her, a reminder to hold our loved ones close and to recognize the signs of danger before it's too late. What do you think drove Bradley Dawson to this act? Could anything have saved Christ that night? Her story leaves us grappling with questions about love, trust, and the hidden darkness within those closest to us. This video is dedicated to Christ Chen, a woman whose light will never be forgotten.